Now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce the State Department's Assistant Secretary for Educational and Cultural Affairs, Evan Ryan. Evan has been a pioneer in utilizing technology and entrepreneurship as a powerful vehicle for education and global exchanges. She knows the Silicon Valley environment and has developed partnerships with many of the leading companies in this area. So please put your hands together for the State Department Assistant Secretary for Education and Cultural Affairs, Evan Ryan.
Thank you, Andy. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here at GES Plus to share ideas with you and to kick off Ignite Talks from two exceptional entrepreneurs. In our Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, we run international exchange programs that show the best of America. And a big part of the best of America is entrepreneurship and innovation. At a time of deep polarization in Washington, there's a pretty strong consensus that exchange programs are a vital long-term investment. They are our country's foreign policy insurance. We sponsor over 140 programs that bring over 50,000 people from around the world here to the United States each year. We send thousands of Americans abroad. We teach hundreds of thousands around the world through our English language programs, and the overwhelming majority of our programs are geared towards youth and women. Increasingly, we are operating in the virtual space, connecting emerging leaders across the globe. Through all of our programs and our alumni, we have had 400 participants in our program who have gone on to become leaders of their country, 80 are Nobel laureates, and thousands became leaders in business, academia, technology, culture, and civil society. So this global network of people, our alumni of our programs, they understand the United States after they've been here, and they can be our partners in solving global challenges. Many of our alumni are here at GES, so I hope you'll have the chance to meet them. We are a large operation with many programs and many grant-making opportunities. If we were a foundation, we would be one of the top grant-giving foundations in the world. But while we're proud of this investment, we can't do it alone. That's why we're working with outside partners, especially the private sector and institutions of higher learning, to help us achieve our mission. Nowhere is the impact of what we do greater than the entrepreneurial and innovation space. The nearly universal appeal of American education, science, technology, entrepreneurship, and innovation opens the doors for my country all over the world. And that helps us advance values and principles that can set the foundation for a more peaceful and prosperous world. In turn, we help spark awareness, understanding, and respect for entrepreneurship where it may be less known or not encouraged. We create space for new potential entrepreneurs to access information, seize opportunities, and benefit from mentoring and support that boosts their own potential. I met a young Moroccan entrepreneur who said the best thing he learned when coming here to the U.S. was that not only is it okay to fail, but that oftentimes it's a good thing to fail, because then you learn from your mistakes and can succeed the next time around. So we advocate for the entrepreneurship ecosystem that reinforces the values at the heart of our foreign policy. Think about the ingredients necessary for a successful entrepreneurial and innovation ecosystem. An education grounded in critical thinking, in which young people are encouraged to argue, to criticize, and challenge conventional wisdom, to learn how to think and not what to think. A rules-based economic and trading system built on transparency, competition, and the rule of law, the protection of intellectual property rights, access to capital, a safety net for those who take chances but don't at first succeed, and predictable regulations that enable all companies to compete on a level playing field. A respect for the rights, freedoms, and dignity of all people, including women and minority populations. Because a vibrant culture of entrepreneurship is almost impossible unless citizens can pursue their ambitions, express their opinions, and take part in the political and economic decisions that affect their lives and livelihoods. And finally, a successful innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem requires connectivity to the world around it. After all, an ecosystem is a community, a vast network of interconnections that allow us to influence and inspire each other. So today, in that spirit of connectivity and entrepreneurship, I'm pleased to announce a new program we are launching, the Global Digital Leaders Exchange. Digital government leaders and their tech sector partners from all over the world will come to the United States this fall to explore how technology continues to transform government. This program grew out of conversations with White House Chief Technology Officer Megan Smith and our shared desire to bring the exciting developments of the innovation economy into government. Now, we're going to hear from two amazing speakers about the power of entrepreneurship to make a difference, and the potential of everyone in this room to be a part of that difference. Marnie Levine is the Chief Operating Officer of Instagram and has the privilege and the challenge of leading the global business operations of a community of 500 million people who capture and share their moments. And the 500 million milestone was reached yesterday, so you should congratulate her when she comes out here. She has previously been the Vice President of Global Public Policy for Facebook, Chief of Staff for the National Economic Council during the Obama administration, and has had other leadership positions at Harvard University and the Treasury Department. She's going to give us her perspective on the beginner influence, the contribution that new minds can make because they have fresh eyes and different perspectives. She also happens to be a close friend, so I miss her in DC, but I'm very excited to see her in her element here, and I'm very excited because I've been able to see her star continue to rise. So ladies and gentlemen, Marnie Levine.
I was going to ask who was going to be 500,000,001. Anyone. Evan, thank you so much for your kind words and for the work that you and all your colleagues have done to bring us together for this year's Global Entrepreneurship Summit. And congratulations to all of you for being here today. You're here because you're helping to make the world more inclusive, more fair, and more dynamic. You're creating the jobs and opportunities that will help shape the global economy and for generations to come, and we are so lucky to have you. The program says that in this session, you'll hear from, and I'm quoting, high-level leaders in the field of entrepreneurship and business. And that suggests that we will impart some wisdom based on experience. But I'm not sure that's quite right, because today, I actually want to talk about why the world needs your inexperience. Let me start by sharing something that I learned from someone far less experienced than any of us. That's my 10-year-old son. A few weeks ago, he finished reading Chelsea Clinton's book, It's Your World, which teaches young adults about some of the challenges in the world today, like the illegal ivory trade. He read about the far-reaching consequences of poaching, from animal rights to human rights. And he found out that ivory is now a main revenue source for many of the worst terrorist groups in Africa. This was news to him, and he was appalled. He immediately wanted to know whether any of his school supplies had ivory in them so that we could stop buying them. 5 minutes later, after a quick internet search, he marches into the kitchen and he issues an ultimatum. The piano must go. Now, my 7-year-old, who's the only one in the family who actually plays the piano, had something different to say about this. Kids have this clear and beautiful certainty. And when it comes to injustice, they simply will not accept that things have to be the way they are. My son refused to accept that there was nothing that he could do about poaching, so he took it upon himself to find a way to make a difference. And I was so very proud to witness this passion and sense of urgency, especially because I don't often see that same passion and urgency applied to cleaning up his room. We can't be children forever. But we can learn from the way that they approach challenges. Children don't know what's not possible. So they look for new answers without fear or hesitation. When you tell them that something has never been done, their first question is, why not? Imagination is everything. Nothing is sacred. But something happens as we grow up, as we learn more, as we know more. We stop seeing all the possibilities. We get used to doing things the way they've been done before, and we stop being beginners and start becoming experts. And somehow, we get used to the world being a certain way. Most of us learn to accept that bad things happen, that the world is unequal, that life isn't fair, and that that's just the way it is. Acceptance can help us get through hard times, but it can also hold us back. The good news is that there are some people who are able to look through beginner's eyes even as they grow older. People who see how things could be, not how they are. People like you. Entrepreneurs approach problems differently. When the world tells them that something can't be done, the first question that they ask is, why not? And it's that restless spirit that brought you here today. Silicon Valley is full of people who never learn to accept things the way they are. It's a global meeting ground for dreamers and innovators, a place where people come to try and change the world. It's still a place of inequality, but as a place of ideas, it is totally meritocratic. That feeling of optimism and ingenuity thrives here. It's where technology, counterculture, and academia rub shoulders in the California sun. But it lives elsewhere too, in Bangalore, in Beijing, where I just was last week, in Stockholm, in the smallest businesses, in the fastest growing startups, and in the most traditional industries. Silicon Valley can be a mindset, one captured in the mottos that entrepreneurs have come to know by heart. Think different. Don't be evil. Move fast and break things. And there are some ways to carry and cultivate that mindset wherever you are in the world for whatever problem you are trying to solve and whatever stage of life or career that you're in. And here is how. First, sign up for big missions. People in Silicon Valley do not set small goals. Elon Musk wants to colonize Mars. Mark Zuckerberg wants to connect everyone on Earth. Larry Page and Sergey Brin aim to organize the world's information. When you choose a big mission, people will take huge leaps to get there. They'll think of completely new approaches and make exponential jumps because doing things the same way that they've always been done just won't work. And the beauty of it is that even if you under-deliver on a crazy ambitious goal, you're still over-delivering compared to everyone else. Second, don't be afraid to pivot. Last week, I was talking to a friend about a government program out here in California that got shut down. It hadn't really been set up for success, and when things started to go downhill, they pulled the plug. They planned to learn from their mistakes and relaunch in a few months with a better strategy. In Washington, D.C., it was pegged as a failure. Out here, we'd say, oh, they pivoted. A learning culture is one of the most important characteristics of Silicon Valley companies. Built into the fiber of this place is a willingness to constantly iterate, to put every last bit of effort into executing, and then to cut your losses, learn your lessons, and move on, because sometimes the best ideas are born out of failure. Let me give you an example that's close to my heart. Raise your hand if you have ever heard of an app called Bourbon. Really hard to see. An app called Bourbon. Okay. That's not surprising. Bourbon was started by two friends called Kevin and Mike. It was a social network based around people checking in and explaining where they were, who they were with, and what they were doing. A good example would be being at a specific restaurant for dinner with friends. It didn't really take off, as you can see from this room. But when they dug through the data to find out why, Kevin and Mike noticed a trend. People were uploading photos to go along with these status updates. It turns out that the most exciting part of Bourbon wasn't talking about where you were, it was showing your friends where you were. Kevin and Mike recognized that people wanted to communicate visually wherever they were. So just like that, they stopped working on Bourbon and focused on creating a simple app for mobile visual communication. They called it Instagram. And now 500 million people are using this service and sharing more than 95 million photos and videos every single day. So many tech success stories didn't make it on their first try. The willingness to constantly evolve and experiment often leads to the best ideas. But serendipity does not have to start or stop in Silicon Valley. It takes extraordinary courage to create something new and even greater courage to walk away. Being able to keep your eyes and minds open to the next opportunity can make all the difference. My last piece of advice is to embrace your rookie advantage. A rookie is a person in his or her first year of sport, or someone who is new to a profession, such as a rookie teacher or a rookie pilot. As entrepreneurs, you are rookies, starting something new, and this is a huge advantage. In her book, Rookie Smarts, Liz Wiseman shows that it's often the rookies or someone who is new that outperform the veterans. They're not burdened by the way that things have always been done. They're not constrained by the notions of what is possible. And they fear failure less and are therefore willing to take more risks. That really resonated with me because after graduating from business school, I took a job as a product manager of a mobile payments company. The only wrinkle was that I didn't have any product management experience. The first time we did user testing, I had to prioritize thousands of bugs. Well, I didn't even know what a bug was. I thought they crawled. And it took a few sleepless nights for me to figure out how I could help debug the system. But what was really interesting was that even though I didn't have any product experience, I was actually able to add value right away. And this is especially true in tech business, where things are constantly changing. When I was in college or business school, even if I had wanted to prepare for my role as COO of Instagram, I wouldn't have been able to, because Instagram didn't exist until 5 years ago, and I am much older than that. When your job itself is new, when your business is new, your industry is new, when your idea has never been tried before, prior experience doesn't count for much. What matters most is that you're an athlete, someone who can adapt and grow and face up to whatever challenges come your way. And sometimes what you don't know is actually an advantage. In his book Originals, Adam Grant talks about how the show Seinfeld almost didn't make it to prime time. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, the joke about Seinfeld is that it's a show about nothing. The characters in the show spend a lot of time talking about the normal, everyday things going on around them, and it is hilarious. But most veteran sitcom developers passed on Seinfeld. It didn't fit the standard formula for sitcoms. they couldn't imagine how it could appeal to a wider audience. It took someone with an entirely different perspective, a variety show producer, to recognize the promise of Seinfeld. Because he wasn't a sitcom expert, he watched the pilot with fresh eyes. What he didn't know helped him see the things that others had missed. I hope that even when you are an expert, you will look at things as if you are seeing them for the first time and be the one to notice the things that others gloss over or choose to ignore. We need more beginners in the world today, more people who are willing to bring fresh eyes to issues of urgency and consequence and dare to make a difference. People like each one of you in the room today. The world needs your passion, your gifts, and your ideas. So, as you move forward in your careers and endeavors, set big goals. Be willing to pivot. Embrace your rookie advantage. I know that over the next few days, you will have the opportunity to learn from all of those people who are sitting around you today. And don't miss that opportunity to stay in touch. For that, I suggest Instagram. But Facebook's okay too. You can find me on both places, and I really hope that you will, because I look forward to cheering you on and seeing what each of you will accomplish. Thank you, and good luck.
So now you can see why I'm a big fan. How many of you are going to Instagram Marnie from here on the stage? Everybody? Are you all on Instagram? I know, everybody. Everywhere we travel, we know that people are on Instagram. It's now my pleasure to introduce Patrick Collison. Patrick is the founder and CEO of Stripe, a technology company that expands internet commerce by making it easy to process transactions from anywhere. Patrick joined President Obama in Havana in March to offer Stripe Atlas to Cuban entrepreneurs. And he will share with us concrete lessons for entrepreneurs drawing from his own experience starting and building Stripe. I should also add that Patrick is originally from Ireland. A reminder that here in the United States, we are a nation of immigrants, and that makes us stronger. Ladies and gentlemen, Patrick Collison.
Good afternoon. So actually, as just mentioned, I grew up in Ireland, and in pretty rural Ireland, in that we were a couple miles outside of a village of itself about 100 people, and sort of, much to my sort of discomfort growing up, we couldn't really run a proper phone line to our house, which sort of limited our ability to get access to the internet. And so actually my kind of first experience with the internet was taking books out of the library about the internet and reading about the internet. Like, this sounds awesome, but it was kind of hard to click on the links. But and so then I think maybe the happiest day of my childhood was convincing my parents to go get this like crazy, awkward, impractical satellite internet connection so we could finally have internet at home. Right. So that's where I came from. And actually then the first time that I ever came to the U.S. was actually to come to Stanford. I was about 16 or thereabouts, and I came to the International Lisp Conference that was being held at Stanford. I was a super cool teenager. Lisp is a really dead programming language if you're not familiar with it. So Stanford holds a sort of particularly special kind of place in my heart, and it's kind of, I was chatting with some of the folks before this, and so I think it's sort of particularly cool to see an event like this that's kind of representing so much that is good about the US to so many people from all around the world. So Stripe itself, the company that John, my brother, and I started, we're a platform for building technology businesses. We help people accept payments from anywhere in the world, from sort of customers no matter where they're based. Then we help people scale those businesses to really any size. And then we work with 2 developers, maybe just starting out with an idea or looking to experiment with something. And then we sort of scale with those developers. We scale with businesses right through to some of the most significant and sort of important internet companies of this generation. And so we work with companies like Indeed, Facebook, or Twitter, or Kickstarter, Shopify, OpenTable, Lyft, some of the companies that are doing some of the most interesting things on the internet today. And so what I kind of wanted to share in this talk was sort of 2 things. The first is Stripe now works with more than 100,000 entrepreneurs and developers from all around the world. We in fact now work with people from more than 100 countries. And so in the process of that, we've kind of learned ourselves quite a bit from them, and I sort of wanted to share some of our learnings and some advice from that experience. And then secondly, sort of Stripe itself, the people within it, myself included, come from many different parts of the world. Kind of the last time we counted, almost 40% of the people at Stripe are working outside of the country in which they were born. And so some of the perspective is informed by that as well. And so the first piece of advice I wanted to describe is the following. So when we first had the idea of building Stripe, the idea was basically how can we build an API and kind of a website that makes it really easy to move money around online. When we had that idea, we first thought, well, it seems really impractical. How could we possibly build that? And to build an API that moves money, I mean, I guess you have to work with banks and you have to integrate with other payments companies, and sort of the whole thing seemed really prohibitive. We knew how to make websites, but we didn't know how to go and integrate with all this legacy stuff. And so what we decided to do was to go build the API, to build the website, and then to use manual work ourselves to go and sort of make the financial part happen. Basically, when the initial beta users of Stripe started using the platform, they'd go through this really nice setup flow, and then manually, in the background, John and I would go and fill out the paperwork, file it with the bank, and sort of go set up their account. And so the users were like, this is amazing, there was so little work. And John and I are like, yes. And so it really wasn't very practical, right? In that obviously we could not possibly do this for many users, but we could do it for a dozen or so. And we could do it for enough to kind of validate for ourselves that there was potentially something to this idea. There was something that sort of was worth further exploring. And most importantly, that kind of once we proved that it was viable, could then help convince other banks and other companies to go and support it. And so the first piece of advice is to do things that don't scale. This really will work, I think, much better than people expect. And when you look around the world, it's much more likely, much more common that ideas fail, not because they prove impossible to scale, but just because they're not good products, they're not good services, right? And so the right way to kind of de-risk it is to first decide, well, is this really going to work? The second thing is the following. So I don't want to get sort of too much into the details here, but before Stripe existed, there was sort of a bunch of divisions between different kinds of companies that existed in the payment space. And so there were banks, of course. There were these things called gateways, which were they built APIs, basically. And then there were these ISOs, which were like another kind of thing altogether. And so if you were just like an entrepreneur looking to accept a credit card payment online, like about the basic thing you could contemplate, you had to go understand the difference between all these different kinds of companies, and then you had to go and sort of figure out how to integrate them together. Like it really didn't make a lot of sense. Where if you sort of proceeded from the user desire, right? If you just say there is a person here and they want to be able to accept a payment, like if you just proceeded sort of logically from that, you would fairly naturally have ended up with something like Stripe, where there's a website you can go to, you can put in your email address and a couple of pieces of basic information, and you can start charging credit cards. And so what's interesting here, I think, is that for so long, this kind of weird division in the industry sort of prevailed, and that nobody had done a sufficiently rigorous job of just relentlessly optimizing for what it is that the user wanted, what it is that kind of made sense given their needs and desires. And the reason to do this, the reason to kind of relentlessly optimize for the user, it's not just that you're going to end up with a better product. There's actually a second advantage. And that is that you'll often end up sort of not neatly fitting into the pre-existing categories that sort of preceded you, right? You'll sort of weirdly span a bunch of different spaces. And this is really good for you because it makes it harder for any competitors you have to compete, because they're sort of naturally built. They're kind of optimized for their particular crevice. And so you could frame this piece of advice as kind of present a structural problem, pose structural difficulties for the other companies in your space. But maybe that's a little bit arcane, and so we'll leave it as relentlessly optimizing for the user. I think another very good example of this right now, and it's posing challenges and indeed opportunities for Facebook, is you look at all the mobile messaging services in China, where they're not neatly kind of operating in the spaces we would expect. They're sort of redefining what a social network is, and we're sort of continuing to see the evolution of that space. The third one is the following. So I don't know if any of you have come across some of these companies. There's a really cool service called Zeit, Z-E-I-T. It's kind of a hosting platform for Node.js. Another nice example is Instabug. It's a bug tracking service, and the founders are from Egypt. With Zeit, the founder, Guillermo, is from Buenos Aires, which is actually coincidentally also where Stripe began. Another nice example is On Air, which is sort of a mobile messaging support tool built by some folks from Kenya. And what I think is very interesting about these services is that they're all built by people from sort of markets that are, haven't yet acquired the same kind of sort of entrepreneurial fervor that Silicon Valley has. However, they're still building for a user base, for an audience all around the world. And what I find is when I talk to people and we're sort of talking about global entrepreneurship, they immediately sort of jump to the assumption that the entrepreneurs outside of the US or outside of the markets we sort of normally associate with it or whatever, they assume that these entrepreneurs are building for their own local domestic markets. And that's obviously a huge mistake. When you actually go and you spend time in these markets, what you realize is that the entrepreneurs and the developers in these other countries, they're just as interested in building for a global audience, right? Because that's what the internet now makes possible. And so the third piece of advice, the thing that I think is really worth keeping in mind, is think about how you can build borderless products that sort of span the whole world. And there's, again, kind of two reasons for this. Partially that it's a bigger audience. You can build a bigger business. Like I found when I lived in Ireland that I was often thinking about sort of solving needs that kind of only existed in Ireland. And even if the product worked really well, it would have been sort of difficult to expand further. And then secondly, if you build something sort of better than what exists anywhere in the world, if you're the best at what you do, and you're based sort of elsewhere, if you're not based in Silicon Valley, this can actually give you a huge advantage because Silicon Valley in many ways is a very difficult place to build a company. It's hugely costly. American immigration laws are tough to deal with. And so if you can be solving a global need elsewhere in the world, that's actually a fantastic place to be. It makes me really optimistic about some of the companies I just mentioned. The fourth thing is to go a little bit further than this piece of advice. So I read that on Monday, a company called Number 26, which is, I guess the name doesn't really give a whole lot away, but they're called Number 26. They're based in Germany, and they're basically a mobile bank. They raised their Series B. They raised $40 million. And then similarly in the UK, there are some companies maybe you've heard of like Mondo, which is also a mobile bank based in the UK. Banking is one of the largest sectors, obviously, in the world of our economy. And what we're seeing is there are all these really interesting sort of new takes on banking being built in Europe. And so the question kind of, why is that happening, right? And what turns out to be the case is that basically banking regulation in the US is sort of incredibly complicated. It's sort of divided between a bunch of different regulatory agencies. And so basically it's easier to innovate in this vein than it is in the US. And so consequently, we're seeing the companies happen there. And so if the previous point was to think about how can you build a global product sort of from wherever it is that you're based, I think number 4 is to think about, well, maybe you can do even better. Maybe in sort of wherever it is that you're based, there's something unique about where you're positioned, about the environment in which you operate, about sort of what it is that's possible for you that can make sort of your particular place of residence the best possible place to go and experiment with some new idea, to try some new endeavor. Number 5. So I don't want to I don't want to spend too much time. I don't want to spend too much time on this point because well, we're curtailed for time here. But in my conversations, and this is, again, already happened when I got here earlier today, but I feel there's a pervasive sort of discussion around whether you should sort of remain in the country in which you start out, whether you should move to Europe, whether you should move to Singapore, whether you should move to the US, or sort of where the kind of headquarters of a company that you start should be based. And what we're seeing with sort of from the Stripe standpoint, with many of these sort of new undertakings and these companies getting started, is that you no longer have to choose. It's not just like a binary matter. You're not like based definitively here or there, but that you can blur the geographic lines, right? You can sort of have maybe your engineering and your sort of product based here. You can raise money from investors in this other country. You can span different parts of the world. And so Intercom is a company with product and engineering based in Dublin, but also with sort of a significant office and significant investors here in the US. Instabug, the mobile bug tracking startup I just mentioned, their main product and engineering operations are in Cairo, Egypt. But again, similarly, they just announced that they raised $1.7 billion from Excel. And so kind of if the points are sort of to build a global product from wherever it is that you're based, to think about sort of what might be better, for you to build based on, again, wherever it is that you're resident. And then sort of you can go further and think, well, I don't even necessarily need to decide definitively to be based in a single place. The world is becoming more connected. There's a lot of advice on the internet, many talks, many books devoted to the topic of hiring. And so I don't want to spend too much time on this point, with one slight caveat. So when Stripe started, it was just myself and John, we spent 1 year, a full year, hiring the first 2 people. So it took a long time. And I mean, partly this was because, we sort of fairly unpromising, ignominious beginnings. As I just mentioned, we were sort of doing a lot of paperwork. Maybe the people looked at the paperwork we were filling out and they're like, I don't want to do that. And so there are some of those challenges. But we also want to be very selective. And in fact, when we hired those first 2 people, we actually then spent another year hiring the next 8. So it basically took us 2 years to get to 10 people. And the reason we spend so much time on that is because we sort of knew that in hiring those people and in sort of choosing the first 10 people of the company were going to be, we were sort of defining what the next 100 people, the next 1,000 people of the company were going to look like. Because those people we hired would sort of themselves attract people. They would sort of choose people to hire. They would sort of be the people that others did or did not want to work alongside. And so in choosing the sort of first people to work with you on whatever it is that you're pursuing or interested in, you need to think of it as a tree, and you're sort of choosing the large branches, and you're sort of really defining what the sort of future light cone is going to look like. And so, in many parts of starting a company, you want to move as quickly as possible, but this is one where I think it's really worth being deliberate, really worth taking your time. I think this is also somewhere a place where you have an advantage in many ways in not being in the US, or potentially even not being in Silicon Valley. In Silicon Valley, it's an incredibly competitive market, and because it's so competitive, you often find it's easy to get dragged into a shorter-term mentality. And so when you're thinking about sort of building something really significant, something with huge impact, something that sort of really moves the needle on the scale of the world, I think in many cases, and sort of based on the experience of my own travels, it can be easier to find those people with a long-term orientation elsewhere in the world. And then the very last thing. I want to talk a little bit about principles. When I say principles, that kind of implies the notion of maybe ethics or doing what's right or something like that. And of course, I think that's hugely important, but it goes further than that as well. Get it up here. So this is a paper written about the Dutch East India Company. I don't presume to be able to speak Dutch very effectively, but it's the Verenigde Oost-Indische Company or something like that. And I think the Dutch East India Company was really the first multinational, right? Founded in the 17th century, paid an 18% dividend for 200 years. So to this long-term point, they did a pretty good job. And it's interesting to think about sort of why they were successful. And people have sort of tried to analyze this question for a long time. And obviously, the world in the 17th century, there's sort of a lot going on, and you can attribute it to many different things. But I thought that this was interesting. Here, at least, Mr. Daniel Gerstel attributes it to the unique charter and the malleable administrative structure of the Dutch East India Company. And when you think about sort of running a company, at least in 17th century all around the world, and you think about the communication technologies that existed, it's pretty hard. Maybe somebody joins the company, maybe you sort of task them with a project, they then set sail, and you're not going to get a chance to talk to them or to see them for 5 years, right? And so, when we think we got it hard with Skype and email and Slack and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and everything else, right? Try sort of having a 5-year clock cycle sort of between interactions, right? And so, to run a company in that kind of environment, you of course need strong principles, a clear sort of set of delineations as to what people should do, how they should make decisions, how they should think about things, what the strategy is, and so forth, right? And so, if you're fortunate enough to be successful, things start taking off, you're suddenly going to be confronted with all of this additional complexity and all these additional decisions that you're going to have to make. You're going to be, will we partner with this company? Will we pursue this possibility? Will we build this functionality, this feature, and so forth? And sort of being in that stage, right, having something that's kind of finally leaving the launch pad after a ton of work, that's not a natural environment. Like, none of us have sort of previously prepared to sort of be in this high growth stage. And so our natural instincts don't sort of equip us perfectly for it. I think one of the most important things to keep in mind is this notion of sort of principles and trying to explicitly write down, to think about, where are we going? What is it that we're going to build? What ought our strategy be? How should people make decisions? And again, I think this is especially important, and it sort of comes across very strongly to me in the conversations I have with folks when you're building a globally oriented company, because if you're contending with time zones, if you're sort of dealing with people in multiple different parts of the world, communication can be more challenging, and so being able to effectively sort of distribute decision-making and have people understand it in different parts of the world, that becomes incredibly important. So those are the 7 pieces of advice. They're sort of informed partly by, again, the global businesses that we work with at Stripe, and then also kind of our own experiences. Fortunately, they don't just work sort of early on when you're getting started. These are also kind of evergreen ideas that you can apply as things progress. Mentioned Atlas at the beginning. So Stripe Atlas is, here we go. Atlas is our product for helping entrepreneurs and developers anywhere in the world start a business. So it does 4 things. It helps you incorporate a company in Delaware. Delaware is sort of the state in which almost all major corporations in the US are based, and so it enables you to create the same kind of company that a Facebook or an Instagram was, or indeed the same kind of company that Stripe is. Secondly, it gets you a US bank account. And so we've worked with Silicon Valley Bank, which is the sort of the bank of choice for sort of VC-backed companies in the US. And so, again, no matter where you are in the world, you can get a Silicon Valley bank account. Third, you get tax and legal advice so that sort of you can understand what some of the implications might be in your local jurisdiction to go and to do this. And then fourth, you get a Stripe account. So you can go and you can charge customers from anywhere in the world. And so we announced Atlas back about, I think it's 15 or 16 weeks ago now. Since then, we've seen sort of a ton of applications from entrepreneurs all around the world. We're sort of inviting everyone as quickly as we can. We've already helped more than 500 companies from, I think, 91 countries last I checked to get started. We're looking forward to helping many more people. But what I wanted to mention is that these principles, these pieces of advice, were actually extremely useful for us in creating Atlas, right? When you think about, blurring the geographical lines or building borderless products, these were the guideposts for us in creating the Atlas product. And so, again, these I think you will find helpful not merely in the initial stages when you're on the launch pad, but also in helping steering the course once you leave it. While I'm on the topic of Atlas, given again some of the conversations I've had with several of you already, while it's still in the invite-only stage, this is just because we're working on scaling it. There were various parts of it that didn't fully scale as we started out. We're working on correcting that and sort of building all the support as quickly as we can. And if any of you guys would like an invitation to Atlas, please just drop me an email and I will make sure you get one. And to try to provide a little bit more kind of color and context on the whole thing, and to sort of give a sense for how we think about a little bit of it, and also to give a sense for the folks who aren't from outside the US, for how people elsewhere in the world are sort of thinking about entrepreneurship and what they believe is possible. I just want to close the video. And so this focuses on 3 entrepreneurs who we've been working with, and I think it tells the story very nicely. And so with that, thank you very much.
After the revolution here in Egypt, no one was buying anything. It really hurt retail. I saw a great opportunity in terms of all of the products that were just sitting on the shelves in these stores and exporting them, giving these boutiques the opportunity to sell globally.
Ever since I was pretty young and I was interested in technology, I had to learn almost everything in English, and my community was in Spanish. I started realizing that there was a lot of developers out there that also needed good content in their own language. So we created Platzi to solve this problem.
Here in Turkey, recent developments hurt the tourism industry, especially the small mom-and-pop shops. At Hotel Runner, our typical customers are family-run properties. So we really help them get online, market their property, and actually start selling.
Online banking here in Egypt is almost non-existent. It's incredibly frustrating to think that we work on Coterie day in, day out, but at the end of the day, there are clients that are coming onto the site, they're loving the items that they see, they want to process the payment, but we're not able to accept it. It's impacting the business, it's limiting us.
Growing as a global company, there are obvious problems. One of the biggest ones that we face right now is payment.
When we first launched Platzi, we needed to charge people from all over the world who speak Spanish. So you try to think, where should I incorporate? We had to do everything here in the US. I had to claim my tax ID number here in the US, and this means flying to open a bank account. We had to go to several lawyers, several accountants. That's hard, it's complicated.
If we can't get paid for the services, we can't really survive. When we heard about Atlas, all 3 founders went just, yes, this is it. We're going to solve this problem finally.
Atlas is going to make it so much easier to accept payments in dollars and different currencies and not have to relocate elsewhere in order to do that. We're always going to have our Egyptian roots, but it's going to put us on the global stage.
It will allow us to access world-class banking and financial system, which really wasn't possible in Turkey.
We're going to see a revolution of startups coming to the global market, and Atlas could help them from the beginning.
Now, I don't need to leave Egypt. I can stay in Cairo with my family, and I can just focus on growing Coterie.
We have more than 17,000 hotels in 127 countries. We are hoping that it's going to be $1 billion business in the next 3 years. But for me, it really is not about money.
But you shouldn't have to be a Silicon Valley insider to start a global company.
It's not just Silicon Valley. It's the Silicon Valley of the world.
I was told we would not have time for questions, but it turns out that we do. And so if there happen to be any in the audience, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Yeah, principle number 6 was higher amplifiers.
Yes.
I was wondering, what was the question you asked in an interview or the characteristic you look for in an interview that suggests to you that that person will be amplified?
Good question. So in case anyone didn't hear, number 6 was this idea of hiring amplifiers, and people who will again, help build that tree in the right way, and what's kind of the best question to ask in an interview, or the best way to tell whether someone's likely to I don't know, meet that threshold. I think interviewing is really difficult. And the thing that I always try to get at in interviews is tensions people have had, things they've disagreed with, things they've changed their mind about, and so on. Because it's very easy for somebody to kind of to spout things that sort of sound pretty plausible, or things they heard other smart people say or whatever, and it's kind of hard to disentangle what's their thinking versus kind of what's that of others. And so I often ask questions of the form, sort of, what was their biggest kind of professional disagreement? What about disagreements where they kind of, in hindsight, felt they were right or wrong, and so on? Or what things they've changed their mind about in general over the kind of preceding couple of years. And the point is not to get at sort of disagreements or changing their mind, but try to get at their thinking rather than that of others. There's also just like a kind of an intuitive sense for, imagine that sort of the roles were reversed, and this person was interviewing you. Like, is this the kind of person that you would want to work alongside, conceivably for many years, side by side? And that's, I think, difficult to pin down with any single question, but sort of obviously very important.
Yeah. KRS Murthy.
I'm sorry?
KRS Murthy is my name.
Yes.
Very good company, very good idea. How are you looking at the exchange rates and exchanging from different currencies internationally, 92 countries? And do you use an intermediary agency to do it? Or you have built that thing by itself, the whole thing?
Yep. So the short answer is we provide it sort of out of the box in the Stripe product. And so Stripe helps you accept about 140 currencies, so pretty much any currency sort of you might plausibly want to use. And it's kind of come back to that point of sort of rethinking the structure of the industry. You often had to go, to your point, to sort of different intermediaries to do those conversions, and it also made sort of the planning really difficult, because you'd receive the currency on one day, and then you're converting on a different day, and now you have this like exchange rate risk, you don't know the rates and so on. And so when you and the premium to pay and all this stuff. Right, or exactly. Yeah, the point he was just making was that either you or your customers might have to pay a premium and so on. And so what we've done with Stripe is that if you bill in sort of a currency that's different to your bank account, we just automatically handle the conversion. You don't need to do anything. And then we tell you in real time what the exchange rate is. And so you know, like, right at that second, exactly how much you're getting in your real currency, as in the currency of your bank account, even if you're billing in some other currency. I mean, from the standpoint of the question is which intermediary agency. From the standpoint of the Stripe user, there is none. You don't need to think about that.
Given that today is about women entrepreneurs, I'm curious if you can comment on the role that recruiting and retaining women have played in your growth strategy, especially given many women entrepreneurs are going to find themselves working for early stage companies.
Absolutely. So we generally think about hiring and supporting, hiring women and then supporting women entrepreneurs as sort of part of the general class of making sure that sort of people from every background can sort of succeed to their maximum potential. And so it's something we think about sort of both in the Stripe product, where sort of what we want to do is to support and to empower people no matter what their background is or no matter where it is that they're based. And it's also something we think about a lot in our recruiting and in our sort of the makeup and the shape of the Stripe organization overall, and that from sort of every different background, and especially as the organization gets larger, so we can sort of start to look at some of these statistics, how it is that we're doing and what it is that could sort of, in various parts of the world, have things fare better. The thing that I personally spend a lot of my time on is sort of Stripe's overall management and leadership, in the sense that while sort of thinking about all of this has sort of so many different sort of specific manifestations, and there's so many, it's so multidimensional. The thing that I really care about and that I kind of want to spend my time on is that sort of the the senior leadership of the Stripe organization represents an effective diversity of background and of origin. Because if that's not there, I think it's so difficult to get it right in every other part of the company. And that one I feel is really on me. And then just to get back to your question, to sort of how we think about it from a product standpoint, it's whenever there are places or categories or again, people from backgrounds we feel are underserved, that's kind of when our spidey sense goes off, in that we often use the word kind of internally of universal or universality, right? And the notion that, again, regardless of background, people should have equal access to these opportunities. Like, I only kind of briefly touched on it, but you really had to go and sort of to talk to a bank to convince someone else that sort of your idea was worthy of their support, was viable. A human made that adjudication in order to sort of get a business started, an internet business started previously. We want to make things more permissionless, so that even if you don't come from a background that sort of people naturally expect, even if you don't look like stereotypes that they might have in their mind, that we can and will enthusiastically support you. So there's a much longer answer possible, but I'll try to phrase it briefly. Okay, and I've been told that is the last question, but I'll try to be around afterwards in case anyone else has more. Thank you.
Great job, Patrick. Oh, you did? Thank you. Great. Big thank you again to Patrick Collison, Marnie Levine, and Assistant Secretary Evan Ryan. So, quick housekeeping before we move on to the main event, the finals of the pitch competition. We're expecting a full house for the finals. So if folks do have extra seats in the middle of their rows, if they could just move in a touch. There's also seats on the balcony. There's one staircase on the left-hand side. So if folks are standing or sitting down the side and would prefer to have a comfy seat upstairs, there are plenty of seats available. So without further ado, this is the main event that folks have been waiting for, the finals of the pitch competition. And for this, I would like to welcome our MC from the State Department, Ms. Nejla Grabowski.
Hello, GS Plus delegates. So there's been a couple months of build-up for Spark the Fire pitch competition. In April, we invited all